Well, why don't we leave the aggravating issues of today and go to Samuel, 2 Samuel. We are in the middle of chapter 11, and this is a very difficult chapter, very distressing chapter. But I don't know, it's somehow easier to deal with this than it is to deal with all the garbage that we're seeing on TV. Anyway, actually, it's interesting to wonder how this story of David and Bathsheba would have played out on CNN. Worth thinking about. Okay, so here we go. So we're starting with verse 14, and just to remind you, I mean, you know the story. What we've seen so far is that David, as he's strolling, his soldiers are at war against the Ammonites, and he's in Jerusalem at his palace, and he's strolling on the rooftop, and he's able to see down, and he sees Bathsheba, and she's very attractive to him, so she sends for her, and he essentially rapes her. And we said whether or not he actually raped her or he didn't, but the very fact of a king commanding this woman to come to him, she certainly didn't have a lot of choice in the matter. And realizing that he's in trouble, and she's pregnant, he realizes he's in trouble, and he goes out of his way to try to fix things. First, when Uriah comes back from the war, he tries very hard to get him to go home. And if he goes home and if he, sleeps with his wife, then nobody will question whose baby this is. And that fails because Uriah is insistent that how can I go home and enjoy my wife when my army is at war? So he stays with the servants of the king and he doesn't go home. And then David is really upset and he's stressed and he doesn't know what to do. And so he sends a message, and that's what we're going to see now. So we're in that situation, verse 14, okay? When David is now in the situation, no matter what he has tried, he has not succeeded in get Uriah to go home, okay? In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, which he sent with Uriah. Okay, now think about this. You're going to see what the letter says. He sent it with Uriah, and he knows that Uriah is so trustworthy, is so loyal, that he's not going to open the message. He's not going to open the letter. He's going to keep it sealed and hand it to Joab, which is amazing because what's in the letter? He wrote in the letter as follows: place Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then fall back so that he may be killed. He is now sending with Uriah a message to the general, to Joab, get Uriah killed. Put him somewhere in the battle where he will be killed. But notice what he says here. He says, put him on the front line and then get everyone else to move back. What is his thinking here? David's thinking. He wants Uriah killed, but he doesn't want to endanger the rest of the troops. So he only wants Uriah killed. Okay, so this is like insane. This is contract, murder for hire. This is really what's going on, but he's not paying Uriah, Yoav to do this. He's wants it to be part of looking as part of the war. Soldiers get killed in wars. No one's going to question if Uriah comes back from battle in a coffin. Well, that's what happens. Soldiers get killed. So when Yoav was besieging the city, he stationed Uriah at the point where he knew that there were able warriors. So what does that mean, able warriors? In other words, the people on the front lines tend to be your bravest people, the people you trust most, the people who are the bravest, the front lines, okay? And so that's what he's doing. He's putting them on the front lines, but together with a whole nother group of fighters. He's not putting him alone. He's putting him with a group of fighters. Well, David anticipated that. He says, okay, put him in that place, but then everyone else would withdraw and leave Uriah there. What happened instead? The men of the city which they are besieging, okay, they are now besieging Rabbah, which is the capital of Ammon. Oh, by the way, do you know what that city is today? In Hebrew, okay, first of all, Ammon, it's from the same word, okay? The capital of Jordan sits on what was once Ammon and Moab and parts of Edom territory. Okay, that's what Jordan is today. The capital of Jordan today in English is called Amman, but in Hebrew it's called Rabat Ammon, Rabbah of Ammon, same city, okay? And actually there are those who say the word itself, Rabbah, means the capital city, because Rabbah means great or big, okay? So that is the idea. It's not just because there's other, for example, Morocco has a city called Rabat.
Yeah.
It's the same root word. In other words, your capital city in those days would be very often called Rabat or Rabat. Okay, anyway, so that's where it is. They have placed the city of Rabat in Ammon under siege. And so what happens is the men of the city of Rabat came out and attacked Joab, and some of David's officers among the troops fell, and Uriah the Hittite was among those who died. So instead of having Uriah with a bunch of soldiers, and at some point having the soldiers pull back and just Uriah be killed, instead, as they're there very close to the wall, to the city, all of a sudden they're attacked. And what it actually says here is they came out of the city. Or keep in mind of the detail here, because this is going to be relevant. And also we have to remember the difference between what the Bible tells us when the Bible is the narrator and what the Bible tells us when it's quoting some figure in the story telling the story. Okay, so clearly the statement or the description of the story that is truly the reliable one is when the Bible itself is telling it to us as a narration, which is what verse 16 and 17 is. That is the Bible itself telling us what happened. And what they're saying is Uriah was put at this point with these warriors, and men of the city from Rabbah came out of the city, went out of the walls, and attacked Joab, and some of the officers fell, and Uriah was one of those who fell. Okay, so that's what really happened. Now let's see how this develops. Joab sent a full report of the battle to David. He instructed the messenger as follows: when you finish reporting to the king all about the battle, assuming that what he's going to say is exactly what happened. They were there, they were near the wall, all of a sudden people came out, okay, and Uriah and a bunch of people were killed, and one of them was Uriah, okay? He said, instructed the messenger as follows: when you finish reporting to the king all about the battle, the king may get angry and say to you, why did you come so close to the city to attack it? Didn't you know that they would shoot from the wall? Who struck down Avimelech, son of Yeruveshet? Was it not a woman who dropped an upper millstone on him from the wall of Tevetz, from which he died? Why did you come so close to the wall? We'll stop here for a moment because I want to just see what's going on here. First of all, Joab is sending a messenger, and he's instructing the messenger he says, you're going to give the report. And he didn't have to tell the messenger what to report because the messenger was there. He was one of the soldiers. He's going to come. He's going to say, we were at the wall and we were attacked and a whole bunch of people died. That is the simplest message. And he's not going to mention Uriah at that point because he doesn't know that Uriah has there's a special interest to David. Uriah is like all the other fighting men that died. Okay, so David understands that his initial report is just going to be a straightforward report. But then he's saying like this, he's anticipating that David is going to be upset. Now, why is he going to be upset? First of all, we know that what David had said to Joab is arranged to get Uriah killed, not all these other men. So as soon as this guy comes and says a whole bunch of soldiers fell, he knows that he's going to get angry, okay? He's anticipating. And then he's anticipating something else. The only way all these men could have gotten angry, in his logic, is because they came too close to the wall. If you come too close, if you have the city under siege, you can step back further from the wall and still make sure nobody leaves the city, because you can easily shoot anyone who leaves the city. So you are you're putting forward a siege around the city, but you're not up against the wall, okay? And he's anticipating that David is going to say, you idiot, The only reason all these people died is you must have had the men too close to the wall. And what is he using as an example? Using an example, the idea of somebody from not coming out of the city, but somebody from on top of the wall shooting down on those people who are right up against the wall. And he's using an amazing example. Okay, so the example is actually something that we know about in the book of Judges. Now, in the book of Judges, it's in chapter 9. If we can assume that at least this part of the book of Judges is more or less in chronological order, and we know that the book of Judges spans over 350 years. Okay, so we're talking about something. The book of Judges is 350 years, and Samuel. We are now from 1 Samuel up until this period of time. We're talking about, I don't know, 70, 80 years. Okay, because we have Samuel, before Saul, then David. David rules a total of 40 years, but right now we're in the middle of his, or even towards the beginning of his reign or somewhere. So we're talking about quite a long time. We're talking about probably close to maybe even 400 years since this story that he's referring to takes place. So what is the story? The story is about Gideon. Now, you may remember that Gideon has two names. Gideon has a name, Gideon, and he has a name, Yerubbaal. Okay? And Yerubbaal is only mentioned once or twice in the book of Judges, but we know that's his name, Yerubbaal, and it's interchangeable with Gideon. What we also know, though, the name Baal, I think we talked about this once, but for those of you who may not recall or who weren't with us in some of those discussions, the name Baal is the name of a pagan god. The word literally means Lord. It could be any kind of Lord. It could be a human Lord. It can be a godly Lord. It means Lord. Okay. And by the time of the book of Samuel, there is a great deal of problems dealing with the pagan gods Baal. Okay. And what you find then is names that appear in other places with the word Baal get changed, and they put in the word Boshet. Boshet means shame, okay? And it's actually ironic because when the names were given, Baal, because it means Lord, could easily refer to God. So Yerubbaal, that was a name that at the time of Gideon was seen as a name of encompassing the idea of Lord, which Lord, the Lord God, okay? But later on, because Baal became, or was a name already before, but became such a huge threat to the belief in the one God of Israel, Baal were these pagan gods, and there were different Baals. Every nation or every club, had its own Baal. And we see that becomes a greater and greater challenge, both in the book of Samuel and in the book of Kings. So they changed the name. And it's very interesting because in the book of Chronicles, some of these same people, for example, we met two sons, or a grandson and a son of Saul. One is Ishbosheth, who is Saul's son, who for a while took over Saul's reign until David ended up consolidating the reign. And another person we met was Mephibosheth, who was Saul's grandson, was Jonathan's son. Okay, we've met both of these people. And if you look at the way their name is written in Chronicles, it is written Mephibaal and Ishbaal. Okay, so clearly the challenge that was around at the time when the book of Samuel was written disappeared. The book of Chronicles was written during the Second Temple period. And it's written about a previous time, but clearly they didn't have that sensitivity anymore. And so they went back to the original names of Baal. Chances are they had, it's a little complicated how it happened, but that's just interesting. So here, what we have is instead of this fellow being called Yerubbaal, he's called Yerubeshet. Just like it's like Ishbosheth, Yerubeshet, it's the same thing. So we know who is this? This is Avimelech, the son of Gideon. Okay, so if we go back to the book of Judges in verse 9, I had it open. Why did I close it? I have no idea. Okay, Judges chapter 9, verse 50. Okay. And this story is about Avimelech, who's a really bad man, and it's about his death. And his death is because he basically comes up here. There are people who are rebelling against him, and they're in this fortified place. And I'll just read it. Avimelech proceeded to Tevetz, which is the same place we're talking about. He encamped at Tevetz and occupied it. Within the town was a fortified tower, and all the citizens of the town, men and women, took refuge there. They shut themselves in and went up on the roof of the tower. Avimelech pressed forward to the tower and attacked it. He approached the door of the tower to set it on fire, but a woman dropped an upper millstone on Avimelech's head and cracked his skull. Okay, and that's the end of Avimelech. What's so fascinating here, again, a story that happened 400 years earlier. Clearly, this was such for us reading Judges, if I asked you today, what was the story in Judges that you remember most? I don't think you're going to remember this story. Most people, when you're reading this story that Yoav quotes about, Yerubeshet and this woman throwing a millstone, I would venture to say that most of us, I certainly didn't remember the story. Most of us are not going to remember the story. But the very fact that Yoav here anticipates David's response, not just a basic response like, why did you go so close to the wall? But bringing in the story of Yerubeshet means a story 400 years old made such an impression at that time that it becomes part of folklore. And it becomes something that everybody knows and everyone refers to. And it seems that the lesson is when you're planning a battle, don't get too close to the wall. Because, and this is also very important, who killed him? Avimelech? Not a soldier, a woman. Okay? Now today, in our times, women are soldiers. In those times, the weakest person in society is a woman. So if even a woman was able to kill the king, Avimelech was like a king. He was a bad man, but he was like a king. If even a woman can do it, the message about don't get close to the wall clearly reverberated through the centuries. And so this is so ingrained in the armies of Israel from that time on. It's just very interesting. For us, it's just a fact and a story, but this gives us a little bit of an insight of how certain pieces of information become folklore, become, so important because they become such practical lessons for the people of the time, which of course for us is no longer a practical lesson. But anyway, this is what he's anticipating, that he's going to say, you remember the story. It was a woman with a millstone and she was able to kill the king. You're idiot. Why do you go so close to the wall? So what does he say? Then he gives, this is the second half of verse 21. He already then gives the messenger, if David comes and says this to you and challenges you in this way, this is what you answer. Then say, your servant Uriah the Hittite was among those killed. Now, the way this is put together, the way Yoav is sending this message, okay, he's sending this messenger to say something that the messenger, okay, and the messenger, assuming he doesn't know the story, he doesn't know anything about the fact that Yoav is told by the king to kill Uriah. How is that going to answer the question? The messenger himself is going to think, okay, I'll say it, but why is this important? How is this going to calm him down? Only Yoav knows that this is going to calm him down. Okay, that was mission accomplished. Uriah was killed. Okay, so now let's see what the messenger actually does, because the messenger changes a little bit. The messenger set out. He came and told David all that Yoav had sent him to say. And now we get a direct quote. And I ask you, was it really what David told him, what Yoav told him to say? The messenger said to David, first the men prevailed against us and sallied out against us into the open. Okay? Now, that's very, very important, because the truth of the matter is the scripture itself tells us that that's what happened. Look at verse 17. The men of the city sallied out and attacked. And so he's saying this also. First, the men prevailed against us and sallied out against us into the open. Okay? So you have to wonder, the messenger here is very clever because he realizes there is a logical failure in what Yoav has told him to say. If indeed what happened was the men went out from the city, does it matter how close you get to the wall? Your fear then is not about you're standing too close to the wall and someone from on top of the wall shoots down or drops a millstone on somebody, but your threat is coming from out of the wall. Your soldiers have come out, your enemy soldiers have come out, and you're in a head-to-head battle. And of course, the people on the front lines are going to be more vulnerable. So the messenger tells what really happened, okay? But he says it in a way, then he adds something to this, okay? The original story was, look at verse 17, the men of the city sallied out and attacked Yoav, and some of David's officers among the troops fell. So what is he saying here? First, the men prevailed against us and sallied out against us into the open. Then we drove them back up to the entrance to the gate. By adding this little narrative, he is able, in a sense, to combine what really happened with what Yoav tells him to say. He understands that he's got to get the soldiers back towards the gate. But he also has to say what really happened. They came out of the wall. Okay. But the archers, okay, now he gets the archers in here. But the archers shot at your men from the wall, and some of your majesty's men fell. Your servant Uriah the Hittite also fell. Now there's no mention of the archers in verse 17. Does that mean it didn't happen? It could have happened. It could have happened. But you see what the messenger is doing is taking both what we know from verse 17, plus the need, which he doesn't understand, the need to make sure David understands that the men are up against the wall. And then he's going to have to respond to this issue. Why'd you bring the men up against the wall? And he says about the archers. I'm assuming the archers did happen, but he changes what he's telling David from what Yoav initially told him. He kind of improves upon it. Whereupon David said to the messenger, but the archers shot at your men from the wall, and some of your majesty's men fell. Your servant Uriah the Hittite also fell. What we don't see here, okay, is David challenging the messenger. How come you came so close to the wall? So whereas Yoav anticipated, he said, okay, we went up, we had a battle, they came out and a bunch of men were killed. And then David's question, but why did you get them so close to the wall? He anticipates it, so he heads off the question. He creates this narrative that's a combination of what happened with the archers coming down, and immediately he says, and your servant Uriah the Hittite also fell. So it kind of saves David from saying, why did you come so close to the wall? Whereupon David said to the messenger, give Yoav this message. Do not be distressed about the matter. The sword always takes its toll. Press your attack on the city and destroy it. Encourage it. Now again, David and Yoav are communicating to each other through a messenger who does not really know the whole story. Okay, he doesn't know that David commanded Yoav to kill Uriah. Okay, well, what is actually David saying here? And I think what he's saying here is two different things at the same time. On the one hand, he's following along with the game, giving the message to the messenger that makes sense with what the message is saying. Because and this is like, instead of David saying, why did you get him too close to the wall? Yeah. But that is in David's head. Okay, David's head, not really, because whatever, let's put that aside for a second. But the messenger would understand that David would be questioning Yoav's military decisions. Why did you create a situation where the archers could reach you? Why did you go so close to the wall? And instead of challenging him on that, because the messenger already gave him a kind of calming answer, Uriah is killed, David now sends a double entendre kind of message back to Yoav. He says, don't be distressed about the matter. The messenger hearing that will assume what David is saying. I realize you may have made a mistake in bringing the troops so close to the wall, but I'm not going to blame you for that because things happen in war. People get killed in war. And I'm not going to go into whether you made a mistake, should you have, when you were driving back the men back into the city, did you really have to get so close to the wall? That is the message that David is sending to Joab, that the messenger understands. The issue is here, was Joab doing the right thing? Should all these men have been killed? Was there a problem with Joab's military strategy? And David is saying, no. First of all, people make mistakes. And second of all, people get killed in war. The sword always takes its toll. Go on, you're doing well, okay? But what is David really saying to Joab? He's basically saying, I made you kill somebody on purpose, and you did what I told you to do. I'm sure you're feeling guilty. Don't feel guilty. Don't feel guilty. And that's the message he's conveying to Joab through the messenger, but the messenger has no clue that this is what David is trying to tell him, because David doesn't know, the messenger doesn't know that David commanded Joab to kill David. So we have this, what I think is a very interesting exchange between David and Joab through a messenger who is the unwitting deliverer of messages back and forth, and he doesn't understand what's really happening. But what we're seeing here is, number one, David's anticipating the fact that Joab will feel guilty, which means David himself may be feeling guilty. He did a terrible thing. He wanted to get rid of Uriah, and he got him killed. He tried other ways, and it didn't work, okay? Now, we alluded to this last time, but I want to repeat this again. There are two reasons, basically, that David is trying so hard to get rid of Uriah. Well, first, before he gets rid of Uriah, what is he trying to do? He is trying to cover up what he's done. He has had sex with Bathsheba, and she is pregnant at a time where her husband was off at war. Clearly, she had relations with someone who was not her husband. That's obvious, okay? We also raised the possibility last week, which you do not have to accept, I'm not sure if I accepted, that it is even possible some rumors had going around that people saw Bathsheba come into the palace and leave the palace. And it could be that Uriah got wind of it, but let's put that aside. That to me is muddies the waters a little bit, okay? I prefer to see them all as innocents, okay? The Bathsheba was effectively raped, and that Uriah had no clue. And he stayed with the men at the gate because he couldn't bring himself to go and enjoy his wife at a time when Israel was at war. And there's an implicit, in my opinion, criticism of David, who's wandering around his palace looking at beautiful women while his men are at war, contrasting that with Uriah, okay? So question is, what is David trying to do? On the one hand, he's trying to cover up his own crime. Oh my gosh, if people find out that she's pregnant and she's pregnant with me and I did it, I'm in big trouble. I'm in big trouble. This is a big, bad thing that he does. And so first he tries to make it so that everyone will assume that her pregnancy is from Uriah. And when that doesn't work, he gets Uriah killed. Okay. And then what does he do? Let's read the next two sentences, next two verbs. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband Uriah was dead, she lamented over her husband. She mourned him, okay? Which is also a very clear indication there was no willingness on her part for David. She loved her husband and she was loyal to him, okay? After the period of mourning was over, David sent and had her brought into his palace. She became his wife and she bore him a son. So he acts right away, David, which will also cover up his iniquity. He married her. Oh, look how wonderful this king is. His general was killed in battle, leaving his wife pregnant, or not pregnant. We don't know she's pregnant, leaving his wife a widow. He's going to take her. And then, of course, the son is assumed to be David's. It's all a question of a few days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. The baby can just as easily be legitimately David's as illegitimately David's. So David has covered his tracks. He did this at the same. How does he accomplish this? By having Uriah killed. On the other hand, there's another way of looking at this. He's protecting Bathsheba. Because if Bathsheba will end up being pregnant, she will be outcast. She may well be tried and stoned for adultery. Is David going to come forward and say, oh, I did it? I doubt it. Doesn't look like it. He's covering it up. But in the course of covering up his own sin, he is indeed protecting Bathsheba. And he doesn't leave her. He does bring her in and he marries her. He takes responsibility for her. He takes responsibility for her child so that no one will suspect in any way that she had relations with somebody else. So I think really two things are going on. And I'm not saying David didn't do a sin. He did a huge sin. But I think, and he should never have tried to get Uriah killed. But I think he's actually doing two things. He is, on the one hand, hiding his own sin, but on the other hand, protecting Bathsheba. And we see this particularly in the way that he marries her and claims this pregnancy, this child as his. Okay. So we got to the end of chapter 11, and I just want to read the first verse of, is it the first verse? No. It's my Bible's written weird. The last half of verse 27, what does it say? And this is the end of chapter 11. But the Lord was displeased with what David had done. So we see what David did, and we're giving all kinds of understandings. Well, he did this terribly, but he's also protecting Bathsheba, and the whole story is there. But there's a very clear judgment, and God said, "This is wrong. This is wrong." Okay, and what we're going to take up next week in chapter 12 is a fleshing out of that. What is God's message to David? What was wrong? What was the worst part of what he did? And of course, he does that by sending his prophet Nathan, who we are now meeting for the first time, as sending Nathan to David. We will take up with that next week, please God. Any comments or questions?
How awful to fall into the hands of Joab, who David knew was such a bad man, with his experiences with Abner and others. So,
well, I think, okay. I think Joab is a complicated character. Joab does some wonderful things, and he's very loyal to David, and he's done some wonderful things. He goes too far with Abner. And there's that comment by David saying, the sons of Zeruiah, which is Joab, and his brothers, Amasa and Abishai, etc., they're difficult. So I think one of the things that is so amazing when, when we read fairy tales, okay, old-fashioned fairy tales, or just old-fashioned stories, very important and to these stories also is there's the good guys and the bad guys, okay? And there's always going to be, especially for children's stories, the good guys win. You have the evil that is a threat, and the good guys that are threatened, and there's a bit of tension, and then the good guys win. And the moral of the story is it does not pay to be evil because goodness will always prevail. Now, life, unfortunately, is a little more complicated than that. And one of the things that's so brilliant about the Bible is that God is trying very hard and brilliantly to, on the one hand, make sure we have very clear moral messages. There's no blurring of the lines. This is evil and this is good. About behaviors, about actions, about sins, about righteous deeds. This is a good deed and this is a bad deed. But when it comes to human beings, most human beings sin and do good things, okay? And the question is, what on balance, are they going to be righteous people or are they going to be evil people? Is the balance between the righteous deeds and the evil deeds. And are the evil deeds momentary mistakes? Are they moments of weakness? Is there repentance? These become essential questions. So the way this story is presented to us in chapter 11 is this is the only way it can be presented. And I would say the same thing about Yoav, whether in this story or in any of the stories we deal with him. He is not evil. He is not righteous. He's somewhere in between. He does some things that are really wrong. He does some things that are really right. He's a complicated person. And what we'll see in this story, David is a complicated person. My goodness, we have this picture of someone so righteous. And look at this story. Look what we see in chapter 11. Oh my gosh. And again, we're going to go on to chapter 12. But what does God do for us in the scripture? He makes it very clear. But the Lord was displeased with what David had done. Yes, David's a complicated figure. And we're going to see how it plays out. But the scripture makes sure to tell us this is not how you behave.
It does give Joab, it does give Joab the inside edge on David, though, doesn't it? Because he now has him in his political control, which is why he can then rat on him to Absalom later on.
So that's an interesting connection. But what we do see here, nowhere in this, we don't ever see Yoav coming to David and saying, you got to pay me something, or you need to, he could have used this as extortion and bribery against David from the beginning, and he doesn't.
But wise operators get powder dry, don't they?
No, but it's not just that. In other words, here, when David sends the messenger to Yoav saying, don't feel bad, I think David understands Yoav is going to be feeling bad. Now, if he's an evil character, he would have killed Uriah and not felt bad. And I think David is right. He knows his general. He knows Yoav. He knows he's going to be feeling guilty. I mean, picture what Yoav is in. He's being commanded by his king, put Uriah on the front lines. He doesn't know why. He doesn't know the whole story. And so the question is, should Yoav have listened to this? Maybe Yoav should have said, "No, wait a second. There's something morally wrong here. I shouldn't be listening to this. This is a total immoral." When we talk about after World War II, this idea was strengthened that there are commandments, orders that you must not obey because they're inherently evil. They're inherently wrong. This was that kind of an order. But did they have that kind of sense in those times? Was there that idea? I don't know. But clearly Yoav here is, again, it's complicated. He's loyal to his king. He does what he says. Complicated. But yes, I think it was something we definitely need to take up when we deal with the Absalom stuff. Where's Yoav and all of that? We definitely have to take that up. So thank you for pointing that out. Anyone else? Okay. So great to see you all. And we will meet again next week. Bye-bye.